Dobar dan, ja sam Andja Petkovic.
Hello, my name is Andja Petkovic, Deputy Director of the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies. I want to welcome all our speakers here, high representatives of the Serbian government, high representatives of NATO, European Union, and the US. Dear colleagues from leading world institutions, experts from Serbia, representatives of the diplomatic corps, I want to thank you for your participation thus far and to welcome you to this final day of Belgrade NATO Week. The organization of this year's event was not an easy task. We do not have the luxury that some larger organizations have to save send the date a year in advance, but we are proud that we can do in a very short time what others take a year or more. For this, I thank our CEAS team and our director Jelena Milic, and to all of you who agreed to participate in such a short notice. As you can see, there is no more than 5 of us in this hall to observe the measures of the government regarding the pandemic. So we chose this hybrid format to have an impression that all of you are here with us and the topics that we are discussing are important and cannot wait for the pandemic to finish. All 3 days of the conference, we have a live stream on YouTube in Serbian and English. The links can be found on natoweek.rs. I also want to tell you that you have a new CEAS report on our website. This is us, whose parts were mentioned by Ms. Milic at yesterday's panel. The report will soon be available in English as well. Before giving a short overview of what we heard during the past 2 days, I want to ask all speakers who are in Zoom to try and talk slowly and clearly, both for the interpreters and the Tanjug and other media who are transferring the event. I also want to thank our technical support who made sure that we have no hitches and technical difficulties. During these 2 days, we had the opportunity to see the opinions of civil society organizations and the international community. We heard the impressions of the recent Washington agreement, and from the Chamber of Commons director, we heard that there is no cooperation without mutual interest, which is a good way to unify the region and send a message to the EU that the Serbian economy has benefits, and the Mini-Schengen initiative is the farthest reaching of all the initiatives. We heard the experts such as Milanović, who participated in the EADRC to see the consequences of the Berlin process. NATO officials assured us that they respect military neutrality and the suspension of military activities for 6 months. We also heard from them that Serbia is important to NATO and that NATO is important to Serbia. The alliance strongly supports Belgrade-Pristina dialogue under the auspices of the EU and the agreement signed in Washington. We heard that every political step is important not only for Serbia and Kosovo, but also for regional peace and security in the entire Euro-Atlantic region. We heard about the readiness of the US to observe Serbia's military neutrality and increase the scope of cooperation, and for Serbia to say where it wants to enhance cooperation. We heard that Serbia is a reliable partner to UN and EU-led missions, and that political dialogue is ongoing regardless of other things. We heard that the cooperation from Serbia and NATO should be encouraged and developed. We heard from MFA representatives that the cooperation between Serbia and NATO is not a topic for either one, but further development of partnership is. This cooperation has its future and high potential to be improved through a partnership that can be further expanded in every individual area so as to achieve mutual objectives of security and stability. We also heard about organized disinformation campaigns which pertain to the use of the depleted uranium and its consequences to the health of Serbian citizens, along with warnings that NATO and member states need to fight this more strongly. You have results of the public opinion poll, This Is Us, Serbia 2020, which was performed as part of our project, which we ordered from CECID in early November this year, which we discussed in detail yesterday. the support of cooperation between Serbia and the US in the past 4 years. We heard about that. We also heard that only 5% of Serbian citizens are for NATO, but 37% don't see NATO as in a negative light, whereas cooperation between Serbia and NATO is not assessed as negative by 47% of people. In Southeast Europe, there is a continuity policy of the United States, and many positive trends should be supported by the new administration as well. Also by the representatives of the State Department of the Defense Department of the U.S. We can see how important this cooperation is. We were reminded about the mission earlier of saving air pilots in the Second World War. 63% of Serbian citizens support stronger cooperation with the U.S. In the economy and the defense, regardless of the administration. 53% of citizens noticed a positive change in U.S. policy regarding Serbia. We confirmed that the public perception is dependent on the position of Kosovo and the bombing. It's necessary for people to learn more about these relations, since 35% of people are unaware of how many states are at the same time members of NATO and the EU. With this short overview of the past 2 days, I would give the floor to the moderator of our first panel, Terry Schultz.
Andja, for opening up the audience. I am Terry Schultz, coming to you from Brussels, the home, of course, of NATO and the European Union, both relevant to this conference and to Serbia. I'm a freelance journalist. For those of you who don't know me, I've been covering NATO for more than a decade and have, of course, within that seen Serbia's fate in the alliance grow, sort of recede, and now we're going to learn a lot more about where they are now in terms of both ambition and possibilities. So I would very much, of course, like to congratulate Jelena and Andja and the entire office for being able to pull this off. Also, thanks very much to the interpreters who have managed to keep up with this on both channels and here on the Zoom. So you have also managed to pull together from across the Atlantic and across all of Europe some very high-level participants, and from what I've been able to listen to over the last 2 days, really moving the conversation forward, and helped by your very interesting study called This Is Us, which I hope everyone has had a chance to look at, because we're going to be talking about some of the results there. Now, I am going to move forward with my esteemed guests. We have Milan Ranković, Serbia's Acting Assistant Minister for Defense Policy. Tomasz Petkovic, also here in NATO, or I don't know if he's actually here in Brussels with me at the moment, but we know each other from NATO. He is Poland's ambassador to the alliance. Thank you very much. John Capello, Chief of Operations for the Balkan Security Network. That's a think tank based there in Serbia. He is also a former U.S. Air Force attaché and an acting defense attaché. His Excellency Yahel Vilan, Israel's ambassador to Serbia, is also joining us. And wrapping up the panel, Damon Wilson, whom we all know. He is the Executive Vice President at the Atlantic Council, based in Washington. He also held posts both in NATO and in the National Security Council. So I think we have all checked our audio and we are all good to go. Yes, everyone nodding? Everyone can hear me? Okay, we are going to start with you, Minister Ranković. So from the reactions of NATO officials that I've seen over the past couple of days at the results of the quite disappointing.
Da li se čujemo?
Čujemo se.
Zahvaljujem se.
I want to thank Terry Schultz. Her picture froze at the end of her address, but I couldn't hear to the end. First of all, I want to say hello, and I want to assess, first of all, the cooperation between Serbia and the US in the area of defense and some primary defense policy objectives of the Republic of Serbia. First of all, it's my pleasure to take part here today on behalf of the Serbian Ministry of Defense and to exchange our opinions with people about cooperation with the US. And it's yes, I want to thank the organizer for participation, since the Ministry of Defense and the defense policy sector that I'm heading strives to maintain civil society activities aimed at better dialogue and improved international cooperation, which is a prerequisite for further improvement of peace and security in the region. First of all, I want to say that since March this year, international cooperation in the area of defense was carried out in very unfavorable COVID-19 circumstances. Also, since 9th September, the Serbian government suspended international cooperation in the area of defense with all partners. Its purpose was to, in light of a lot of turmoil in the international scene, to point to both our partners in the East and the West the priorities of our own decision, which is to preserve Serbian military neutrality. In this sense, the Ministry of Defense continuously works to create conditions for the Republic of Serbia to be militarily neutral and to be recognized as such by other countries in the international organization. During the planning and implementation of international cooperation activities, we take care to cooperate with subjects in international relations in a balanced way, so that neither in a qualitative or a quantitative sense there can be any imbalances which would make us deviate from our military neutrality. The changed geostrategic circumstances seen through antagonism between large players in the international scene, we can see right now as an opportunity and inevitability to activate collective security concept and return trust in multilateralism. Here I want to emphasize the importance of international conventions and the conclusion of new arrangements which would reflect positively on global security and return international law to the place where it belongs. On this basis, when we're talking about specific cooperation, the Ministry of Defense is aimed at engagement in the UN, the OSCE, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weaponry, and cooperation with the European Union and CSTO and NATO. We want to continue participating in multinational operations under the auspices of the UN, EU, and OSCE. In addition to multilateral cooperation, for the Ministry of Defense, it is particularly important to cooperate in a military and economic way with the United States, the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, and other traditional partners and important elements of the international community. In relation to this, I will pay particular attention to our relations with the United States. It's important to point out that relations between Serbia and the US is key to the stability and progress in the entire Balkans. And in that sense, for our country, it is very important to strengthen cooperation in all fields. We are witness to the fact that in the past months and years, there have been more economic ties and investments. On the other hand, military cooperation with the United States, and this is something that I'm assessing, and also our American partners, this has been carried out for many years and is probably the most pronounced part of our bilateral relations. Its comprehensiveness and content are used by the Ministry of Defense, are useful for the Ministry of Defense and the Serbian Armed Forces, and we want to upgrade it even further. On average, we carry out over 100 activities together. I would mention participation in common training and exercises, the aid of the U.S. Army for development of our capacities to participate in missions abroad, and to training in the part of the defense education, and activities in terms of the National Guard assistance. As regards the military economic cooperation, I want to say that we procure equipment from the United States and carry out training through programs of aid, military finances, and global initiative for peace operations. As part of military education cooperation, members of the Ministry of Defense and Serbian Armed Forces take courses at all levels for NCOs and officers and general staff courses and the National Security University. Military medical cooperation is another form of cooperation with the United States. In the past several years, in this area, the European Command of the United States Army, there has been a lot of cooperation. We adopted new areas of cooperation and the joint action of the Serbian military medical personnel and the National Guard of Ohio. There's also the state partnership between the state of Ohio and Serbia, which started in 2006, which is still assessed by the United States as one of the most successful out of over 60 programs of the National Guard. In the coming period, we want to step up the number of joint exercises and trainings, and for the purpose of increasing interoperability and preparing Serbian forces to take part in multinational operations. We also want to get new equipment for the Serbian armed forces and other arrangements in terms of procurement, which will be one of our priorities, and the already established ways of cooperating that we have for education and development. They will take part at the set rate. I would like to wrap things up here. I'm sorry that I didn't hear the end of Terry Schultz's address, because if there were any questions, of course, I'm willing to answer them.
So that was my fault because I dropped out there. My Zoom call dropped off. I did have a couple of questions for you. Simply, what had improved specifically under the Trump administration, and why you think that the attitudes toward NATO were so low? If you could just answer those briefly for me before I move on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just in a few minutes, in a few sentences. Moram da kažem da sam pažljivo.
I have to say that I assessed the CESID and CEAS research carefully, and I want to make a clear distinction between the questions pertaining to NATO and the United States. Regardless of the fact that many citizens said that they are against Serbia joining NATO and that many of them have a negative opinion or no opinion, this percentage is significantly lower when we're talking about cooperation. When we're talking about the question about relations with the United States, it is a broad question, so I'm not surprised that as much as 63% of citizens said that they support this cooperation and 17 do not have an opinion. I want to say that these data are not surprising and are not deviating from the previous period. The perception of NATO in our country is still a key way of forming the public opinion, and it's colored by the events of 1999 during the NATO bombing, and it has a weight in our collective memory, so it's hard to expect that it will change in the near future. The relations with the United States, on the other hand, are perceived as bilateral. They incorporate a wide spectrum of questions, much broader than the issues of defense. And the events such as the Washington Agreement and the strengthening of economic cooperations make that be seen in a much more positive sense. During the Trump presidency, there have been improvements in overall relations for multiple reasons, but that doesn't mean that our progress will stop in any way. When it comes to the announced change of the U.S. administration, I don't want to get into this very much because this is not the subject of the panel, but I hope that the growing trend will continue regardless of any personal changes. In any case, the Republic of Serbia will strive to have as best possible relations with the United States.
transportation issue. You said the announced change of president. Is that any? You mean the election of Joe Biden?
Yes.
A nuance there.
Okay. In American administration will not jeopardize our cooperation in field of defense.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that was a very comprehensive answer, and it was really important to me to hear from you first because it sets up the rest of our panel. So thank you very much for giving us such a wide-ranging answer and taking all my questions. So moving on now to Ambassador Szafkowski, with whom I've had previous discussions. Now, if we look at Poland's situation among NATO allies, it may be that Poles have some similar opinions to the Serbs polled by CEAS when it comes to attitudes toward the Trump administration and sort of an appreciation for the way relations have gone under him. What parallels can be drawn, Ambassador, between Poland's experience and Serbia's?
Are we talking about the U.S. administration or in general, sort of Euro-Atlantic accession integration?
Take it in any direction you like.
Okay,
I looked at the CES poll because I found it so interesting. And of course, we know that in Poland, there are often surveys that show that, let's say, Poland wasn't as negative about some of the Trump administration's moves as some other NATO allies.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and it's a privilege to chat with you again, Mr. Terschultz. I've enjoyed our previous conversations very much, and very much happy to be part of this discussion with other distinguished participants. And let me maybe start by tackling the first question by saying that indeed in Poland we focus on deeds rather than words. And when it comes to that, certainly the last 4 years, we've seen consolidation of the US presence and cooperation with Poland and in the entire eastern flank. We've seen a rather pragmatic and realistic approach to the security situation in our neighborhood, which we certainly have appreciated. But certainly Polish-U.S. relations go beyond single administrations, and it's also been an issue which was supported bipartisan in the U.S. Congress, which I think is a good sort of signal for the future. So we look rather optimistically to continue and to consolidate what we've achieved so far. And thank you again for having me on this discussion. I think I want to start by saying that, by the way, are you hearing me? Because I do have some...
I can hear you. You faded in and out there at the beginning, but I can hear you now.
Okay, very good, very good. So I hope you have heard my response to the Trump administration question. Now moving to the main theme of the discussion, I want to say that Serbia and Western Balkans are very important for Poland, not just for ethno-linguistical common roots that date back many centuries ago, but it's an important region, important people to us, and Poland has been engaged and present in the region from very early on. It will also touch on the theme of this discussion. We've deployed in our first NATO mission prior to our accession to NATO. We've deployed in the I4 mission in Bosnia. We then follow up in the K4, and I think it's and I hope I can say that all sides of the conflict there appreciated a kind of non-partisan approach of the Polish forces in those peace support and stabilization operations. We're also very active in the Berlin process, and we support Euro-Atlantic ambitions of countries of the region. When it comes to because I think you also wanted to know about the sort of lessons or parallels between the Polish and U.S. cooperation and in the case of Serbia. Of course, there are certain differences, and Mr. Ranković was like I think quite clear about that when it comes to the ambitions or perception of the security situation. Nonetheless, I think there are some conclusions which can be drawn. First of all, in the Polish case proves that the security cooperation can be a foundation for cooperation in other areas, economic, social, political, and others. But that layer can then improve further the security cooperation. We've started with the hard security cooperation very early when we regained our independence in 1989. We started very early on from the security aspects of our cooperation. We took part in the first Gulf War, in the Haiti mission. I mentioned the IFOR mission. That kind of created suddenly a cooperation based on trust and on a mutual perception of the situation. Of course, with the accession to NATO, the cooperation has focused much more on defense, collective defense, where I think the U.S. presence is indispensable, but I think also the U.S. appreciates the Polish role as the linchpin of the eastern flank. But I want to say that it started from crisis management and collective security. I will at this stage I will maybe not go on to describe in detail the current status of the Polish-U.S. cooperation. It's very complex right now, with the very robust and growing presence, which went beyond just symbolic and purely deterrent role. It's going up to command and control level, planning processes. I think in the future we will see common concept development and training based on facilities in Poland. But I want to reinforce what I've said in the beginning. The economic and other pillars reinforce the security cooperation, and the security cooperation reinforces the economic cooperation, which can be seen, for instance, through the three CEAS initiative and quite a robust U.S. defense industry presence right now in Poland. But also the cooperation with the U.S. has helped Poland to be a constructive actor on the global scene, but I think the U.S. has also benefited from having a reliable partner there. From the Polish perspective, the U.S. presence strengthens the security of the region and is key to the deterrence of aggressive policy of Russia. It has contributed to development of Polish defense capabilities, and I think it's also helped the U.S. to achieve its strategic goals more effectively in the region. Let me also share an observation. I think that the robust civil military culture is an important prerequisite to fully benefit from the cooperation with the U.S. The U.S. is a very complex partner. We can engage on different levels. Minister Ranković mentioned very beneficial cooperation with the National Guard. In our case, we also have a very fruitful cooperation with the U.S. National Guard from Illinois, but we naturally cooperate with the U.S. European Command when it comes to the NATO sort of core task. We cooperate with U.S. CENTCOM when it comes to Middle Eastern deployments. We cooperate with the services and their respective departments in the Pentagon. We cooperate with different branches and cells in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And then it certainly goes beyond just purely the bureaucracy and administration. I would like to highlight the role of the Congress and of the think tanks and of the civil society. That is and just want to say that we are still in a process. I mean, we are progressing, but we still haven't sort of fully taken advantage of the potential of the cooperation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. We'll have time to come back to some of those questions, especially the NATO cohesion and attitudes toward Russia. I definitely want to get back into that. But now I'm going to move on to John Capello. Now, John is a former American military official working in the Balkans. You see and hear things that, of course, the rest of us can't, not being there. So I'm very interested in this question in the excellent CEAS survey that talks about the feeling that U.S. policy has become more positive towards Serbia. So I'd like to know, from your perspective, what has changed in the last 4 years for the better for Serbia, and what are the fears that something might change back or somehow worsen in the next 4 years under a Biden administration? Thank you for taking that.
Thank you, Terry.
Hvala, Terry. Hvala. Drago mi je što sam ovde.
Thank you for including me. And to the crew at CEAS, you guys are doing a great job, and thanks again. Look, I think the recent administration's policy in the Balkans, I think, is marked by a continuity of sorts. The core policy has been consistent over time, and that has been to assist Serbia in achieving its goal of European integration. This has been a constant theme from the previous administration to this administration. I have confidence that the President-elect Biden and his team will proceed in that light. A unique aspect, I think, to this administration's approach has been they seem to have taken the lens of the 1990s off and taken a kind of a fresh approach, a fresh look at the region without some of the biases of the 1990s. And I think that has been seen here as very positively, as a very positive occurrence. The recent White House, the September agreement in the White House is seen as a positive step, of course. And I think it is a real opportunity. You know, some might argue or critique it that it's symbolic, but I think it's an important step, and it can. And the key is that it can have an effect, a practical effect on people's daily lives, and that will be significant in the future. So, you know, the new administration, I think, will maintain this continuity. I don't think there's while there may be some discussion on the fringes that you know, Biden in the past has done or said certain things. I think President-elect Biden is very clear that he is a strong advocate for Euro-Atlantic integration, for European cooperation, and I think and this is going to be an important aspect of improving the relationships with our European allies so that we could continue forward in the Balkans. I think there's a real opportunity to build on these first positive steps, on achieving practical aspects, not just in the economic realm, but in the mill-to-mill realm. As Minister said, he did an excellent job of outlining all of the positive aspects of the U.S. and Serbian military-to-military relationship, and keeping in mind the complex nature of a relationship with the United States, as the previous speaker mentioned. I think that the United States is really ready to move forward and take the mill-to-mill relationship to the next level. This is something, you know, for over a decade I've been watching. We've had these similar conversations, the importance of Ohio National Guard, of IMET, and these are all important. They really are, and we've seen a significant improvement in interoperability, in Serbia's participation in international peacekeeping operations. These are all extremely significant and important moves forward. But I might suggest that a way to take the relationship even to a higher level would be to establish significant and deliberate bilateral defense consultations. This is a real, and not that the process isn't deliberate, but I think that this is a process where both sides put real skin into the game, defining goals and objectives, and then identifying and executing efforts to achieve those objectives. So if you want to talk about a move in a strategic direction, then I think those types of consultations are essential. And we saw that in the past with our partners in Eastern Europe. I'm sure the Polish example we could use as a very good one. So I think I'll stop there, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in this realm. So thank you.
Thanks, John. And you know, while you say that the Washington Agreement is seen as a positive step, I have all the pages of this survey here because I find them so interesting. And this is despite the fact that most of them believe it will not be implemented in its entirety, or that either most of it will not be implemented or it will be implemented partially. So, I mean, but simply getting it done was a good thing, right? I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but they believe it's positive whether or not it comes to fruition.
Yeah, you know, there's always that Balkan skepticism, I guess, a little bit. But I mean, look, a dose of healthy skepticism is important. I mean, you know, we all have seen discussions and meetings where we all shake our heads and agree, and then we move on and we forget it. And this would be a real shame if this happened. I get a sense. Look, we're going to hear from Damon in a little bit. I mean, the work that the Atlantic Council did to bring the leaders together back a month or so ago. Look, that's important, and I think it's something to build on. But it's not going to just happen, right? It's not going to it's not going to happen by itself. It takes commitment by leadership, but then hard work on the ground. And I think that hard work on the ground is what we need to see to make those changes in people's daily lives, to where leadership could then continue to take even more courageous steps in a direction that we would all like to see towards European integration. Oop.
There we go. Yes, Damon, we'll be talking Ambassador Wieland. So, Ambassador, let's take a step back and look at the impact of the U.S. election on the wider geopolitical and security situation that inevitably affects the Balkans as well. From where you sit there in Belgrade, what are your expectations for the next 4 years, and how do you expect it to be felt there? Serbia, what will be the impact on Serbia of the Biden administration?
Well, thank you very much for having me, although I have to admit I feel a bit out of the block in a way. But just to react to the survey about the Washington agreements, I do hope the 10% who believe they will fully implemented are the ones who hope that the Serbian embassy will be moving to Jerusalem. But nevertheless, we somehow found ourselves as part of these agreements. I'm not sure this is the right place to discuss this topic, but in addition, I was very happy to hear the colleague from Poland. It's the country which is close to my heart. I also served in Warsaw before. And, Israel and Serbia are in many ways maybe feel each other very close in terms of we might see both as front lines between the West and the Islamic world in many ways. But I think the solution, if you like, or the national security policy that both countries have taken is absolutely maybe the opposite. I mean, Serbia from the very beginning was looking for this middle way and not to be aligned with any of the big powers, while Israel from the very beginning, one of the main pillars of our national security was to be aligned with a big power, one of the superpowers, and definitely the United States of America. So for us, it's not even a question whether we support or trying to get ourselves closer to the United States administration. And I think, understanding this importance for Israel, of course, throughout the years, we kept a very deep dialogue with the American society, a bipartisan approach. We do it first and foremost, for example, diplomatically. We have 8 consulates generals in the United States, of course, in addition to our embassy in Washington, D.C. We have a strong lobby. We have a very strong, of course, Jewish lobby. Although maybe one interesting fact is that in the recent elections, maybe the gap was never wider. While some 75% of American Jews supported Biden, some 77% of the Israelis supported President Trump. So, but I think, it's probably getting more into domestic politics in the United States, not so much for, I don't think there could be much of disagreement between us and the Jews in the United States about Trump's support for Israel's interest in the Middle East. We just seen the recent agreement that were signed between us and UAE and Bahrain, and now other countries are lining up to sign agreements with us. So I think if I can conclude in maybe one aspect which is very important for Israel, and again, you, the expert on the Balkans, might see how it can reflect here as well. But what I think, the Middle East in the last decade or so have shifted this traditional axis between us and the entire Muslim world and turned into more pragmatic lines. And these lines were the ones who've been identified by President Trump and his administration, enabling them to finally reach an agreement between Israel and the Sunni states in the Gulf, understanding that we are sharing the same main threat, which is Iran, of course. We still see Iran, obviously, as the main threat for stability, not only in the Middle East, but also in Europe. A country which is reaching for, or trying to reach nuclear capabilities and already have 3,000, 4,000 kilometers range of missiles is definitely not a threat only for Israel. And we understand that this cannot be done only by us, and therefore the cooperation of the international community, led by the United States, we hope still be led by the United States, for us, it is very crucial. Now, again, as I said, most Israelis supported Trump, I think with kind of obvious reasons for his record in the Middle East in the last 4 years. But it's not to say that we're not welcoming President-elect Biden. He has a long record of supporting Israel as well. Again, I think the support for Israel, at least, is genuinely bipartisan in the United States. I don't think one could decide that one party supporters are more or less pro-Israel, and again, I think it's based on long-lasting friendship, shared values, and understanding that we are standing for the same values, basically. So again, we're looking forward to work with the new administration. And again, if I can try to give some recommendations also on the Balkans, is that we should look sometimes maybe out of the box. Maybe it's not should be out of the box because we should understand that the boxes have changed. And some paradigms that we used to take with us for a long time, again, if we take the example of the Middle East, that Arab countries will not have peaceful agreement with Israel because the Palestinian conflict should not be solved yet, it's no longer there. So I think if there is a lesson that we should look into things with sometimes different prisms and try to look for solutions that maybe some years back, maybe some months back, we were not thinking they are part of the deal. So I think that's what I can contribute at this point. And if there will be questions, of course, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you very much.
I keep muting me. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much. I think there will be questions. And now moving on to Damon Wilson from the Atlantic Council. You've already received a lot of compliments for helping to at least tee up the Washington agreement. But now you get the hard part in this panel of weaving everything we've talked about together, the military cooperation, the political cooperation, the perhaps the lessons learned from other countries. Damon, what do you think the prospects are at this moment with Serbian attitudes toward NATO? What are the prospects for greater stability and security in the Western Balkans at the moment?
Terrific. Thank you very much, Terry. It's such a pleasure to be joining from Washington, and I'm glad to be here with some good colleagues who have been doing great work in the relationship. I just wish that we could all be there in Belgrade at the beautiful Palace of Serbia. And I also just want to give a quick nod at the top Part of the burgeoning relationship between the United States and Serbia is being reflected at the Atlantic Council, as we are delighted to welcome on board Maja Petkovic as our senior fellow who's been with the East-West Institute there in Belgrade, joining our team as part of our commitment to the Balkans Forward initiative and a brighter future for the whole region. But to answer your question, Terry, let me just put a little bit of context, take it up a notch. First of all, I love that we're doing NATO Week in Serbia because it reminds us of the fundamentals. And kudos to CEAS and Jelena Milic for building this product, this enterprise. Because at the end of the day, the alliance, which is what pretty misunderstood in Serbia, as we can see from the polling data, the alliance is about overcoming historic differences. It's about reconciliation. It's about former adversaries that become partners, in some cases adversaries. And so that's important, I think, for this NATO week to go back to first principles of what all this means if you're an audience member in Serbia. So let me just make a few key points. It's clear that Serbia has been making an effort to grow closer to the United States and to advance its European aspirations. That has been noticed. It's been noticed in Washington across the aisle. But the population of Serbia has noticed too, is this a poll that CEAS has unveiled shows that 53% of citizens of Serbia see improvements in the relationship with the United States recently. That's pretty good. It's been noticed there. These polls also show the large majority of the population of Serbia supports closer and greater cooperation with the United States, including on security and defense, and that tops 65% support. That's pretty significant. And so you add that to what we've just seen, a new Serbian government, new ministers that send a clear signal at a key time of transition in the United States. President Vučić in his appointments has sent a very clear signal of the importance of doubling down on his European aspirations, but also to tee up a more constructive relationship with an incoming Biden administration. And I think it's important to note that while we have seen real advances under the current administration with Belgrade, it's Vice President Biden, after all, who, as vice president, made a pretty historic trip to Belgrade in August 2016 to deliver some key messages. He knows this region, he knows the actors, he knows the players, as does his team. And his team is going to have some really good counterparts. The appointment of Defense Minister Stefanovic turns a page and really opens up a new door of possibility on defense cooperation, where some of those doors might have been a little bit less open in the past. Foreign Minister Selakovic of the Foreign Ministry also signals a real commitment and perhaps Vučic's personal attention to foreign affairs, understanding how important that's going to be going forward. And perhaps most important, the appointment of the energy minister, of a minister who really sends a breath of fresh air, a different signal about Serbia's approach to the energy sector, greater energy security, really will have, I think, some opening here of doors. And all of this over time, I think, begins to reflect the fact that that some of the influence and some of the Russian influence in Serbia has been detrimental to some of the goals of Serbia. It's provided alternative power centers. It's been part of the endemic corruption that's been a problem in the energy sector. And it's helped to stall some of the potential that we have in our security and defense relationship. And most importantly, it's been disruptive on the issue of Kosovo, knowing that that's an issue in the dialogue with Pristina. The lack of progress there really hinders Serbia in its overall aspirations. And so to step back, we've got a strong foundation for U.S.-Serbia relations, specifically in security and defense, which is our topic today, as the minister kicked off with. First of all, perspective. Since 2001, there's been over $1 billion in U.S. assistance to Serbia that's really focused on counterterrorism, transnational crime, participation in international peacekeeping operations, defense reforms, all sorts of issues on border security, clearance of explosive remnants from destruction of surplus ammunition, lots of cooperation. And it's been spearheaded by our Ohio National Guard, a partnership that's been there for 15 years. They do 20 events annually. And the U.S.-Serbia relationship, we've got 60 security cooperation defense events on an annual basis. And we've seen that because of our investments in the International Military and Education Training Program, over 60% of Serbia's overseas military training and education has been in the United States. And that's a pretty big deal. We've seen, as the minister mentions, that Serbia joined the Global Peace Operations Initiative, that the United States has helped invest $20 million in defense modernization, provided 40 Humvees, and we have seen a tenfold increase in Serbian participation in international peacekeeping operations. That's significant, because the reality at the end of the day, this kind of defense cooperation, it's in our mutual interests. It's about building capacity, but in many respects, it enhances Serbia's commitment to its own policy of having independence, of having neutrality in its own military affairs, because it's not as dependent on any particular country to support primarily its legacy systems. So we've got an opportunity here to continue to increase interoperability through procurement decisions made in Belgrade, to help increase that defense cooperation, and to build, as we were talking about, John mentioned, on these White House agreements, which, while unorthodox, really have provided some, I'd say, momentum for even cooperation on the defense side, something that the Biden administration will build on, I am sure, not work to undo. And it's why you've seen energy diversification and things like technology and 5G, these provisions at the heart of this. And while some of the language has been vague, it is critical to the future of U.S.-Serbia defense ties, because it's Serbia's energy security and independence. It's fundamental to its national security. And this issue of technology is not about how to prevent investment. Digitalization is the future for a country like Serbia, but it is about how to ensure that its critical infrastructure is something we have confidence in being able to cooperate with. So Terry, let me just close with a little bit of a sense of where we can go forward in our transition here, and as Serbia has transitioned its own government. One, I think it would be helpful that there be more clarity, stop the mixed signals and hedging, and more clarity and messages from Belgrade about building its European future and its partnership with the United States. Second, that the economic side reinforces the political side, and President Vučić has been powerful in pushing forward regional economic integration. This is a way to advance European aspirations, but also to make this market more attractive for larger U.S. investors. And now we have the opportunity to leverage the U.S. Development Finance Corporation office in Belgrade and John Jovanović's effort to really ensure that our economic growing ties reinforce our security cooperation. Finally, staying focused on advancing the dialogue with Pristina, because this removes an obstacle to some of Serbia's objectives. And I think about how, I know it's an emotional issue, but how to pursue this in a pragmatic way, doggedly for Serbia's interests. And finally, for us, I think we can think bigger. I think it's possible to imagine a U.S.-Serbia relationship that could evolve in the context of progress on these other issues into a strategic partnership with a stronger security pillar, a more vibrant economic and prosperity pillar. And finally, I think this requires us to really not be trapped by the past, but to focus on building a future where the pillars of Serbia's democracy need to be stronger, where this embrace of technology as a way to leapfrog and grow economically is core, and a way to understand the fundamentals of what this alliance is about and this NATO week. It really is about former adversaries reconciling. And that is at the heart, I think, of Serbia's future and the U.S.-Serbia relationship. So I'll stop with that, Terry.
Thank you much. Thank you so much, Damon, for a huge range of issues and so much information to help. And just to back up what you were saying, the poll does show that people don't know much about NATO. I mean, whether they would be negative or positive is another matter, but they simply aren't hearing a lot about it. So I think that's definitely a message to NATO itself to do more outreach there if the Serbian government is in favor of that. But something that we haven't talked about much at the moment, and this is for all the panelists, but probably heading back to Minister Ranković to start, and that is whether the kind of future that Damon talks about, that he envisions, would even be possible if Serbia continues its closer military cooperation with Russia. I don't know how a Biden administration will feel about this. Damon and John, maybe you can pitch in on that. But I'd like to know from Minister Ranković firsthand, this reports that that Moscow would be setting up a post there in Belgrade. Where are we on that? The latest reports I could find was that it was still something being considered. So I don't know how far along that is, if that's something that's still going to be happening. And then from the rest of the panel, how do you think that will affect the willingness of the United States to move forward, and so whether it will increase the uncertainty on the ground so much that, you know, business won't follow? Minister Ranković, you first, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I hope the interpretation will be more precise this time. Before answering your question, if you allow me, I would like to reflect on what Ambassador Petkovic and John Capello said. They talked about the importance of the United States and its presence in the region and support European integration. As you know, regional cooperation, in addition to being a part of the political criteria for EU accession of Serbia, is important because it's work towards building neighborly relations and stability in the region. Cooperation in the area of defense, when it comes to that, I would like to point out the United States as the founder and supporter of multiple regional security initiatives, which are particularly important for strengthening trust between countries and efficient implementation of potentials of this region. Laura Cooper from the United States mentioned yesterday a good example, a charter where the Republic of Serbia has a status of observer. This is the Adriatic chapter, and Serbia is also a member of all regional initiatives. And I want to mention an important regional initiative such as the cooperation of the Ministers of Defense in Southeast Europe, where the US is the founder and the member of this initiative. All these initiatives were used to start a dialogue in defense and led to the implementation of many projects based on sharing. And this kind of project is very useful for the Balkan medical forces acting on the Western Balkans. So all these projects have positive effects towards strengthening the capacities and interoperability of our country to contribute to the EU security and the participation of our units in international operations led by the EU. I would also like to touch upon what Mr. Wilson said, who mentioned mentioned Kosovo and Metohija. Specifically, in our relations, it is something that we are opposed with regard to which we're opposed to. This is the most important issue for us, and something that we are opposed, and it's important for the international community. So as a member of the Ministry of Defense, I would like to point to the differences in positions regarding the transformation of the so-called Kosovo security forces into the so-called Kosovo armed forces. This is unacceptable for the Republic of Serbia. It is gross violation of the U.S. Security Council Resolution 1244 and the Military Technical Agreement. So any support by the U.S. to this process is unfounded for us and unjustified. But despite this, Serbia sees the United States as a key partner in the process of reaching a lasting and sustainable solution to the issue of Kosovo. When it comes to your question regarding the status of the office of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, what I can say is that the current status is that the negotiations regarding this office still have not commenced. The negotiation process for the opening of this office will take place in the way that will in no way affect our military neutrality, sovereignty, and independence. Opening of this office will be carried out in a way that does not create concern for any of our partners. A similar office was opened in 2007 in the Embassy of the United States of America in Belgrade. I can only notice that since this office was established until this day, we were never asked in any way, or nor has anyone showed concern regarding its opening engagement. This has not come from any partners. I'm referring, of course, to the Russian Federation, and that's it. Yes, thank you.
I'm not sure if I just didn't hear specifically. Is this office that has been mentioned and which I could read about, it was in planning phases at least at the end of last month. Is this office going to open in Belgrade from Russian MOD?
Actually, we are in the status that we are waiting for official confirmation from Russian Federation to start negotiation for opening this office in Belgrade. But during this process of negotiation, we will take care about our military neutrality, our sovereignty and integrity of Republic of Serbia, and opening of this office will not jeopardize any kind of cooperation and will not cause any concerns from any partners with whom Republic of Serbia cooperates in field of defense. And also, I will continue that similar office is already open within the US Embassy in Belgrade in 2007. And as I told you, nobody asked us about this office from its opening until now. And there is no concern about, let's say, engagement between the Office of Defense Cooperation and the Serbian MOD.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Ambassador Shatkovsky, how do you feel about that? What do you think it makes Serbia more secure to have, I mean, a U.S. office and a Russian office there?
Well, so let me say first of all that I of course respect the Serbian sovereign choices, and I of course respect and understand that we've got a different history. Poland was had a kind of closer, more kind of first-hand relationship with Russia throughout its history. Also, Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, was a kind of one of the initiators of non-alignment movement, with all of the legacies that come with it. Nonetheless, I think that we've entered the era that is defined as a strategic competition between the major powers, and it's not just a kind of cold interest-driven. It's also kind of values-driven competition. It doesn't look very optimistic when we look into the future on the prospects of this period to be very soon behind us. So I think that certainly kind of maintaining even distance may preclude some further development. One thing, and of course it's not my role to speak on behalf of the United States, but I mean the strategic competition era is clearly spelled out in the U.S. national strategy. I don't think that there will be premises to change that notion in the future. And also when we look at the way Russia operates, I think it's sometimes pragmatic and opportunistic, but when we look at the close neighborhood of Serbia, and I mean here Greece and Macedonia, I think that this is a very interesting example when Greece was and Greeks and Macedonians were trying to reconcile about their differences, about their past. I mean, this was met with a kind of underhand tactics by Russia. This is an example that Russia is a partner that sort of limits your choice of options, and Russia actually in many cases builds on certain grievances. I would like to live in an environment where our neighbors with whom we have sometimes very good relations on a personal level, would behave in a different manner. So far, this is not the case. So I'm slightly more pessimistic than Minister Ranković when it comes to the perspectives of maintaining an even distance between the two states. Thank you.
NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg took a pretty nonchalant view, of course, being concerned. He said the same as you, that Serbia has the right to make its own decisions in this capacity. So he certainly wasn't trying to rile up any rhetoric on this decision. But John Capello, what are you seeing on the ground? Do you think that this is something that will increase insecurity? And again, U.S. business doesn't have to go where it doesn't want to go, as Colin Powell always said, and many others, I'm sure, but I choose to quote him. Cash is a coward.
I think this speaks to two issues, really. The definition of strategic relationships, right? And again, we all agree. I mean, I'm stating the obvious. Of course, every sovereign country has the right to choose and select its relationships. Mr. Stoltenberg is stating the obvious there. But what is having a strategic relationship with China, with Russia, and the United States mean? I mean, if they're all strategic relationships, then what is strategic? And so, but then we have to look at the technical and tactical aspects of a relationship, right? Serbia has very, very difficult decisions to make, recapitalizing its military. When we look at the situation with acquiring the MiG aircraft. There's a political aspect to that, but certainly there's a very, very practical aspect. Serbia had to make a very difficult decision on how to maintain its air force. This was driven by financial considerations as much as anything, and so the systems, the legacy systems Damon mentioned, require very technical decisions, right? So, and because you have to maintain capability, you have to maintain operability, and then the key is establishing interoperability with these systems. So there's very technical aspects to this question, but the political ramifications of these technical decisions is what now we're talking about. I don't know what an Office of Defense Cooperation, a Russian Office of Defense Cooperation, would do in Belgrade. That's not for me to comment on necessarily. But when we talk about wanting to be more interoperable with the European Union, wanting to deploy more on peacekeeping missions with the EU. Look, the EU has problems maintaining interoperability, so interjecting the Russian component becomes even more of a difficult balancing act. So yeah, it speaks to both the strategic level and very technical and tactical level questions, I think.
And Damon, to you, would this future that you envisioned, would that be possible, given that everyone accepts they don't have the right to tell Belgrade what to do, but they have the right to make their own decisions based on what Belgrade does?
Look, Terry, I have confidence in Serbian decision makers to understand that their priority is to protect their own interests and Serbia's sovereignty. And I think that will guide the contours of how they manage through this issue, as it has on many comparable issues. And so I think the Secretary General has set the right tone on that. And the only distinction I would make is that there's very little similarity in how the United States security services or defense establishment engages and cooperates with its partners compared to its Russian ones. These are quite different ball games, so we're not talking apples to apples here, I think, and that's the power of the partnership that I think can be offered in closer U.S.-Serbia security cooperation, and that it's premised on partnership, capacity building, responsiveness to the interests and needs of Serbia itself. And so I think this will play out as part of a larger context, but it does hit at the importance, I think, of Belgrade, of being clear about where it sees its future and what family it's part of, and how it wants to advance those very practical aspirations that have not just security implications, but it's really about its economic future. It's where Serbian youth are going to be educated and what kind of companies they'll have jobs in. And I think you can't disaggregate all of this.
Does anyone else want to jump in on this very important question before I turn to another topic? No one looks eager. I wanted to ask something about the U.S. relationship inside the NATO relationship. Do you feel that the United States has a role, has, if not an obligation, has an interest in improving the attitudes toward NATO inside Serbia? I mean, given that everyone says that everyone on the NATO U.S. side, I would specify, says that bringing Serbia into the fold, bringing all the Western Balkans nations into the fold, whether that be the EU or NATO or both, is in the interests of stability in the much wider region, in all of Europe, in fact. So does the U.S. need to do more to change the image of NATO in Serbia itself? I mean, things look fine for the U.S.-Serbian relationship, but does the U.S. need to take a bigger responsibility there? Anyone want to talk about that? Maybe Minister Ranković, could they do it? I mean, the numbers are so low. Is it even possible for a good U.S. PR campaign for the alliance to make a difference with your citizens? Would someone like to jump in there, Minister?
Generally speaking, there is room to improve, but all questions initiated are directly aimed at the questions of Kosovo and Metohija. And as far as cooperation is concerned between Serbia and NATO, just like my colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have said, our aim is not membership in NATO. And the optimum of our cooperation with NATO is seen in the Program of Partnership for Peace, where we can choose on our own the activities that we will carry out with the alliance, but also with its member states. In bilateral cooperation in the area of defense with the United States, in the field, in the practical level, there we implement our procedures according to NATO standards with the aim of developing interoperability and building operational and functional capabilities of our armed forces. Certainly, the Ministry of Defense will continue supporting in every way all initiatives and decisions that positively affect peace and stability in the region and broader. And in that sense, we unreservedly supported Euro-Atlantic aspirations of our neighbors, with emphasizing that we have the right to determine our own political course based on our policy of military neutrality, with highest cooperation with Euro-Atlantic and other partners. That is all I have to say about this. Thank you.
I turn to you, also, Ambassador. Do you feel that this would be a positive thing for the U.S. to do?
Well, I'll just briefly make a comment referring to the polls that we've discussed a few times. There are three pieces to that poll that are very interesting to me. Or first is kind of clear, right? The attitudes toward NATO remain negative. I mean, that's not a surprise. That's been consistent over the years, as long as we've been doing this conference, and they've been sharing the polling with us. This is not new. I find the next 2 points interesting. When asked about cooperation between Serbia and NATO, while only 14% were positive, 40%, 47%, almost 50% were neutral, right?
Exactly.
About 47% were neutral. And then, I mean, I don't know if it's being too optimistic, but that provides significant opportunity to tell a story, right? And I'm not so sure it's the United States' job to run around and tell how great NATO is, because as the minister says, they're not looking to join NATO, but there are shared values and between the United States, between NATO, between the European space, that these are that Serbia seeks to be a part of. So these are the similar stories. These are the same narratives that we should be talking about. And then the last point, that when they asked about the source, not including the media, where do you get your information? There was, family and friends less than 3%, government 7%, NGOs 5%. But if you look, not informed, 41%. Right? To me, that's a it says two things to me. It depends if you're a glass half empty type of person or glass half full, right? One is somebody's not doing a good job. Or the second is we have a real opportunity to inform people, to share information with people. And I think that's, so to answer your question, yes, we should be doing more.
Damon, and you and I have talked about this, and you at the Atlantic Council do so much work on this. When there is no information, when there are no facts, we know what fills that space, right?
I think that's right. It is important that there's a constructive narrative and that facts really, that people just understand. This is really about understanding. I think first and foremost, the Serbian authorities, the Serbian government and leaders, that they could play a key role here in helping to shape these views. This is, after all, their country, their market, with quite a bit of sway in media. But it doesn't mean that NATO shouldn't be doing appropriate public diplomacy engagement to help educate audiences. That's what NATO PDD is about. That's what this conference is a little bit about. And it doesn't mean organizations like my own can't be working with Serbian stakeholders to help people understand. Really, there's a lot of myths, a lot of things built up that I think that can be explained and debunked. And so the U.S. has a role to play, but I'd look to others primarily. And part of this really is a story of education. Ultimately, I do think progress in keeping the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue advancing will remove some of the friction and some of the muck, if you will, that could clear the path for a more open, honest, and fact-based discussion of what NATO is today and how that can serve, the partnership can serve Serbia's interests.
Ambassador Milan, I would like to also bring you back in here. How much are you concerned? I mean, Israel also has signed some recent agreements with the Trump administration. Are you concerned that the Biden team may come in and reconsider those arrangements? I mean, I'm not saying the Washington agreement will be one of them, but is this a concern of the Israeli government, or do you think that everything will remain stabilized and go forward just as the Trump administration has concluded the deals? Because that is something that Serbia may want to look at.
Well, I think it's a bit too early to say that there are any concerns within the Israeli government with regards to things that were signed between us and the Trump administration. There is concern. Again, it's I think mostly by now with the media, with some analysts, not by the government, of course. And this is regarding the future attitude towards the JCPOA, the agreement with Iran, whether it will be US will get back into it with improvement, without improvement. We know the history of what we thought, and what the Trump administration was more in line with the way we saw this agreement. Regarding the Washington agreement, there is no reason for us to question at the moment. Again, we think our part with Serbia definitely, to moved their embassy to Jerusalem. It's very positive, and it reflects the strong existing relation between the two countries. If I take the Kosovo part, again, I think in many ways we already paid the price, if you want, here in Serbia. I mean, it's a deal done. It's a done deal. So I do hope that it will be implemented by the Kosovo side as well, that they will also open an embassy in Jerusalem. So at this point, I want to be optimistic and to believe that, these all agreements are a mutual interest of the countries who signed it. And we are kind of, again, bystander, but of course it's very important for us. We appreciate very much the moving of the American embassy to Jerusalem. And in the same way, we appreciate any other country who will do the same, because at the end of the day, this is our capital, and this will not be changed by decisions of other countries, and it will not be, again, we don't think it has anything to do with the future negotiation with the Palestinians, like the EU is thinking. Again, we saw the American embassy moving there. It did not affect much the ongoing or non-ongoing dialogue with the Palestinians.
Okay, I'm going to ask everyone now for their recommendation or their hope, merely, for what the Biden administration would do early on in its term to help improve relations with Serbia and to help improve security and stability in the region there. And I'm going to end with you, Minister Ranković, so you will get the last word. Ambassador Milan, your idea, what would you like to see the Biden administration do with regard to Serbia as early as possible?
Well, I believe, it should not be great news to anyone, but definitely there will be no security and a peaceful agreement in this region without solving one way or another, or at least getting some progress on the Kosovo issue between Serbia and Kosovo. And anything the new administration will be able to do in order to bring the two sides to sit and to discuss those matters will be helpful. So I think that should be the first task. I have to admit, as diplomat, I don't see the overall health conditions allowing the new president much time to look outside of the US, but definitely once and when he will do it, it will have to be also for this region.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that, the COVID-19 crisis. It's kind of nice to think we just talked for almost 90 minutes without talking about that, as unrealistic as that is. Damon, what do you think he needs to do? And having been an advisor to administrations before, what would you tell him? Or maybe what you even are telling him, we don't even know that.
Just 3 quick points. One is that we need to see a real alignment between the United States and the European Union with a more common vision, strategy, and set of coordination approaches across all of our agenda, but including especially in the Western Balkans. And I think you'll see that as a priority of a Biden administration. But I also think nesting what is most urgent, which is the recovery from this pandemic and the economic catastrophe that's resulted from it. And so that his domestic priority should reinforce an international priority of how we are working to catalyze a more coordinated effort to vaccinate our populations and to boost economic recovery, coordinated stimulus. And I think there's a role, the Balkans has been hit hard. And so there needs to be this coordinated strategy. And I think Serbia needs to be a part of that larger strategy. This will actually clear the underbrush to allow the team finally to stay focused on having an active, engaged U.S. approach to the Western Balkans, which is focused like a laser and understanding that this region's movement towards Europe is not only in the region's interest, it's in American interest, and we're going to be a part and parcel of helping to support that vision.
Great. John Capello?
Quick point. I agree with the previous two. The president will be very, very busy early in the administration. He's got his plate full. There's no doubt about it. And while I'm not a big fan of purely symbolic actions, I think a high-level visit early in the administration's tenure to set the stage, because look, the United States could do more than one thing at a time. We have the bandwidth to be able to deal with the Balkans. While it may not be the primary foreign policy focus for the United States, we could certainly continue to do it and make progress. There's a great opportunity here to move things forward. I think a high-level visit, setting the stage for strategic dialogue and real partnership with the Serbs to deal with the Western Balkans and really get to a point where we can achieve a Europe that's whole, free, and at peace. It's achievable in the coming administration. It really is. But starting off with a high-level visit will send a message that we are serious and we could do it.
Not just to Belgrade, but also to Brussels, that they would be seeking more synchronicity with the European Union, which would be really important here.
I'm sorry, Terry, and for me that goes without saying that this has to be Europeans. But no, really, I know that you can't assume, but that is an assumption for me.
Well, sitting here and seeing how much work has been done in this city as well, it could certainly use a boost, a mutual boost. Ambassador Petkovic, I can't see your picture here anymore, but I presume you're still with us. Tomasz?
I'm with you, of course, yes.
There, okay, good. Oh, there you are. Yeah. Hi. What would you like to see the Biden administration do first?
Well, I would certainly agree with Damon that bringing allies together, bringing more allies more on board certainly would be a positive development. At the same time, I hope that the new administration will not approach the policy attempting to discard everything what the previous administration were doing, because there were several of positive developments that should be consolidated, and certainly the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue is a positive one. And with regard to Poland, this is the consolidating of the US presence in the entire eastern flank, which, by the way, started in the sort of late Obama administration. So this should be a kind of a bipartisan.
As did many things the Trump administration claimed, if we're talking about spending and all of these things. But that's another panel.
Well, of course, yeah. But so I hope there won't be kind of a clear-cut, reset. We are in a kind of we are drawing the policy from the scratch, and because the realities on the ground just don't allow for such an approach. I mean, we cannot just wait another sort of year or two to kind of realize that this is the world as it is. So this is, but there's plenty of experienced people on that transition team. So I hope that won't be the case. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of names that made everybody pretty confident about European policy, at least. And Minister Ranković, you have the last word. Briefly, what would you like to see the Biden administration do with regard to your country and your region?
Upgrading me to minister. I'm assistant minister.
Acting assistant minister. I've done it. I think I said it twice now. You definitely have the job by now.
What I can say after all the panelists have said their part is that there is a lot of room to improve cooperation, and our task, above all, I think Serbia and the US, is to have joint efforts and strive towards the best results in improving our cooperation. I would agree with John Capello here, who would say that high-level dialogue is important for this, and it should be intensified. And what we are planning, we have been planning with the US, and which is something that Laura Cooper mentioned yesterday, was that we are expecting the Republic of Serbia agenda for the continuation of strategic dialogue. I can say that this agenda will be made together so as to carry out the strategic dialogue, which will contribute to better cooperation in defense between Serbia and the United States. And to wrap up, I would like to thank all the panelists today for very precise and detailed addresses, and for a retrospective that was given in the relations between Serbia and the United States, which definitely has its future. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. I was very privileged to be here with you and learned a lot. And I think we heard a lot of optimism from everybody involved. So there seems to be, a lot of light at the end of this tunnel. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you again to CEAS for having us. And I'll join you later on the last panel.
Thank you, Terry. Well done. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Great job.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Terry, for your moderation.